Roughly 1900 years ago, on a very remote island, a massive hole, about 1 kilometer in diameter, suddenly appeared. Its true depth, however, remains completely unknown. The profound mystery of this abyss sparked humanity's curiosity, and many brave souls ventured to descend, seeking answers. These intrepid explorers are widely known as adventurers. Over many generations, humanity has managed to explore various sections of the abyss, subsequently dividing it into 6 distinct levels. Each level presents unique creatures and ancient relics, all possessing varying degrees of danger. However, the most terrifying aspect of the abyss is the immense physical pressure that afflicts those attempting to return to the surface, a phenomenon widely known as the curse of the abyss. The intensity of this curse varies significantly with the depth reached, ranging from mild nausea and dizziness to severe bodily harm and even ultimately, death. Depending on the level they've reached and their specific abilities, adventurers are categorized into various distinct ranks. Those who can descend to the first level are designated as red whistles. At the second level, they're blue whistles. Between the third and fourth levels, purple whistles. At the fifth level, black whistles. And at the very pinnacle of exploration, or rather, within the deepest parts of the abyss, reside the legendary white whistles. Only those adventurers equipped with special grade relics are truly capable of reaching the 6th level. Over time, these adventurers constructed a bustling city right on the very edge of the abyss, and it is there, within this unique settlement, that Riko, the protagonist of our story, currently resides. Currently, she holds the rank of a red whistle and lives within an orphanage, which is primarily funded through the diligent collection of various relics. One day, during an expedition specifically to gather more relics, Riko found herself on the verge of being devoured by a monstrous creature. Just when it seemed her fate was sealed, a sudden, powerful flash of energy struck the beast, sending it flying far away. Following the distinct trail of impact left on the trees, Riko discovered an unconscious robot whose hand was still emitting smoke. With the help of her close group of friends, she managed to evade the director's watchful eye and secretly bring the robot back to the orphanage. To revive the robot, they utilized every bit of available electricity in the entire area, causing a widespread power outage. Due to her extensive history of mischievous antics, Riko was promptly interrogated by Professor Jiruo. Fortunately, the robot quickly understood the precarious situation and hid itself in time, thus avoiding discovery. Even so, Riko was still taken to the disciplinary classroom. While the professor diligently searched for clues, her friends attempted to help her, but Jiruo cornered them. Just when it seemed there was no escape, the robot activated a mechanism in its arm and rescued Riko through the window, thereby avoiding certain punishment. After this incident, Riko decided to name the robot Reg, a name chosen in honor of a beloved dog she once had in the past. The very next day, Riko and her friends gathered to review all the collected relics, but they soon discovered that the orphanage's archives contained no record whatsoever mentioning Reggie. This deeply worried Riko, as she feared that if anyone were to discover Reg, he might be dismantled or even confiscated. To prevent this, they devised a clever plan to disguise him as a normal orphan, allowing them to enroll him in the orphanage without raising any suspicions. Surprisingly, the plan actually works, and Reg begins his training as a delver. Over time, several months pass, during which Riko and the other children explore the initial layers of the abyss for practice, while Reg remains at the orphanage, as he still lacks permission to descend. One day, upon returning from an expedition, Riko and her companions noticed that the city was particularly lively. The high-ranking delvers, those brave individuals who dare to descend into the most perilous depths of the abyss, had returned after several months of extensive exploration. Riko, feeling incredibly excited, takes Reg, and they head straight to the docks to greet the returning adventurers. It is there that they meet Hablock, a seasoned veteran explorer who hands over a white whistle and some sealed documents to another guild member. Amidst the bustling crowd, someone recognizes the white whistle and mentions that it belongs to Liza, one of the most powerful and legendary delvers. This leaves Riko utterly stunned, as Liza is her own mother's name. Soon after, the city celebrates a grand festival in honor of Liza's white whistle's return, commemorating her last dive into the abyss, which occurred a full decade ago. During the ceremony, Riko reflects deeply on the profound meaning of the white whistle that Hablock had delivered to her on behalf of her mother. Later, Jiro approaches Riko and gently reminds her that the festival is a way to honor Liza's enduring legacy, encouraging her not to feel so worried. After a brief conversation, Jiro reveals why Riko must wear glasses. He explains to her that it's not a physical defect, but rather a curse of the abyss, a direct side effect of having been born within its very depths. He tells her that Liza became pregnant with her shortly before embarking on a perilous 10-month journey to the 4th layer of the abyss, and that she used a rare relic to return Riko to the surface, thereby allowing her to survive. That very same night, Riko receives special permission to examine the sealed documents her mother had left behind. Among them, she finds records of unknown creatures that Liza discovered in the depths, and what impacts her most is a drawing that bears a striking resemblance to Reggie. Alongside the sketch, there's a note in which her mother asserts that she will be waiting for her at the very bottom of the abyss. After reading her mother's notes, Riko carefully puts away the paper and returns to the orphanage. There, she gathers her friends and confesses her firm intention to descend into the abyss to find her mother. However, Nat firmly opposes her, warning her that if she ventures into the depths, she will never be able to return due to the curse of the place and the severe physical effects this entails. Nat explains that the deeper you descend, the more difficult it becomes to return to the surface. The very next day, Reg takes his first steps as a delver in the first layer of the abyss alongside Nat, now proudly bearing a red whistle, a clear symbol of his new rank. While exploring, Reg reflects on his own identity and the possibility of recovering his lost memories, should he venture even deeper into the abyss. That very same night, Reg proposes to Riko that they journey together all the way to the bottom of the pit, sharing the same deep yearning to discover their origins. Later, Riko reveals her plan to escape before dawn. One of her friends hands her a map that clearly shows the 6 known layers of the abyss, a crucial detail for their perilous journey. However, Nat confronts her once again, warning her that her mother most likely died a very long time ago, and that no one could possibly survive a decade in the depths, not even a white whistle. Riko, deeply hurt by his words, flees without looking back, unable to hear any more objections. Hours later, already in the early morning, Riko and Reg manage to escape from the orphanage, but they are soon intercepted by Shiggy and Nat. At that moment, Nat apologizes for his harsh words and guides them to a neighborhood by the docks where there's an unguarded entrance to the abyss. There, an emotional farewell takes place. Riko, fully aware that she might never see her friends again, assures them that no matter the distance, they will always remain connected by the abyss. After their heartfelt goodbye, Riko and Reg begin their descent into the depths of the abyss, quickly advancing through the first layer. On their journey, they manage to catch some fish for sustenance. While checking their belongings, Reg discovers a letter slipped into his backpack. The message includes copies of her mother's drawings and crucial notes about the abyss's characteristics, along with a brief warning from Jiruo, the orphanage leader. In his note, Jiruo informs them that he will begin pursuing them at dawn. Upon reading this, Riko decides to quicken their pace to reach the second level before Jiruo can find them. They slide down a ledge and enter the territory of a spider-like creature known as a Silk Fang. Without hesitation, Riko asks Reg to use her as an anchor to maneuver out of the monster's reach. With a swift movement, both of them launch themselves into the void, successfully escaping the beast's lair. Further on, while taking a brief pause to catch their breath, Reg notices something in the distance. Riko, worried that it might be Jiruo's search party, immediately goes on high alert. However, Reg uses his enhanced vision and confirms that it's only a solitary delver. Even so, they decide to maintain their distance and continue their descent, utilizing Reggie's extensible arms to advance quickly. However, their caution proves insufficient as they are soon caught up to. To their surprise, it's not Jiruo, but Hablock, the veteran explorer they had met earlier. Hablock, in his relaxed tone, comments that Reg might be a relic originating from the abyss's depths, referring to him as a genuine treasure from the underworld. After a brief inspection of the robot boy, Hablock reveals to him that Nat and Shiggy asked him to safely escort them to the second-level camp. However, Riko rejects the offer, firmly stating that they need to make this journey entirely on their own. Hablock, though initially quite surprised, understands their determination and warns them that at the camp they will encounter Ozin, a veteran and enigmatic guardian, known both for her immense strength and her highly unpredictable character. Before saying goodbye, Riko mentions that Ozin was the one who helped her mother return to the surface when she was born, a detail that seems to intrigue Hablock. However, before departing, the explorer reminds them that they must be careful, as the depths of the abyss are as unpredictable as they are dangerous. With this, Riko and Reg resume their journey, delving even deeper into the abyss's mystery. Shortly after arriving at the second layer of the abyss, Riko and Reg venture into the Forest of Temptation, a place feared even by the most experienced explorers. As they advance through this dangerous territory, they hear a cry for help in the distance. Without hesitation, they rush towards the sound, but soon find themselves in an exposed clearing, where they stumble upon an enormous bird-like creature, perched next to the lifeless body of a delver. Riko, alarmed, recognizes the creature as a corpse weeper, a species that mimics distress calls to lure its prey. Realizing they've fallen into its trap, they try to escape, but one of these predators snatches Riko with its talons, attempting to carry her to its nest to feed its young. Meanwhile, other birds of this species begin to attack Reg, forcing him to use the cannon in his arm. With a powerful shot, he manages to destroy several of them, unleashing a devastating energy wave that obliterates everything in its immediate vicinity. Amidst the chaos, Riko is released into the air and falls to a safe spot, but the immense effort causes her to faint, confirming what Nat had warned about the dangers of ascending in the abyss. When Riko awakens, impressed by the sheer power of Reggie's cannon, she decides to name it the Incinerator. However, the robot boy also collapses due to the enormous effort required to use his weapon, remaining unconscious for 2 full hours. When Reg finally awakens, the very first thing he sees is a pair of steaks sizzling over a flat stone slab. Without wasting any time, he begins to eat, surprised by the delicious taste of the meat. Riko reveals to him that he is actually eating the very same birds he eliminated during their combat. Determined to continue, both of them venture into the lowest part of the Forest of Temptation, known as the Inverted Forest. However, the strong wind currents interfere with Reggie's extensible arms, significantly complicating their progress. Soon, they are pursued by a group of red-eyed monkeys, but they manage to escape by crossing the boundaries of those creatures' territory. Finally, they approach the Delver's camp. Reg prepares to climb using his arms, but suddenly feels someone gripping him firmly. Upon looking up, he discovers a woman with impressive strength holding his hands. When they finally reach the summit, they find themselves standing before Ozin, an imposing and enigmatic figure known as the immovable White Whistle. Upon arriving at the camp, Riko thanks Ozin for having helped her mother return to the surface when she was born. However, Ozan, with her cold and distant tone, mentions that transporting that particular box was an utterly exhausting task. She confesses that on more than one occasion, she considered abandoning it due to its sheer weight, and reveals that they even had to leave behind another valuable relic to complete the journey. Intrigued by how 2 red whistles managed to reach that far, Ozan delegates to her apprentice, Marolk, the task of listening to their story. She believes that among young people of the same age, they will be able to communicate better. Before retiring, Ozan lends them blue whistles so they won't raise suspicions among the other delvers at the camp. Quickly, Rico and Reg become friends with Marolk, who, despite his young age, is already a blue whistle thanks to his direct training with Ozan. During a conversation, Marolk mentions to them that, if they decide to stay, they could study together and learn even more about the Abyss's depths. However, Rico kindly declines the offer. That very same night, while attempting to find the restroom in the camp's dark corridors, Rico encounters a strange creature. Frightened, she decides to quickly return to her room without looking back. The next morning, Ozan takes them to a private room to explain what Rico saw during the night. Without mincing words, she tells her that the fact that Liza's white whistle reached the surface should be sufficient proof that her mother is indeed dead. Then she reveals that it was she who recovered Liza's whistle and letter from a tomb in the 4th layer of the Abyss. Furthermore, Ozan asserts that the letter Rico found was not actually written by Liza. Finally, she leads them to a special room, where she shows them the curse-repelling box that once saved Rico. At that moment, Ozan activates the mysterious box using the white whistle and explains to Rico that it is, in fact, the anti-curse box. She tells her that this relic possesses the ability to protect the creatures inside it from the lethal effects of ascending in the abyss, allowing them to survive situations that would normally prove fatal. However, she clarifies that this isn't entirely accurate. Although the container prevents the beings inside from dying immediately, they still suffer the curse's effects and eventually perish. But after a certain period, their bodies begin to move once again, as if something were bringing them back to life. Ozan takes the opportunity to reveal that it was thanks to Rico that she managed to understand how this relic truly functions. She confesses that when Rico was born, she entered the world with no vital signs, but was revived upon being placed inside that very container. This explains how a baby who was still born could survive and return to the surface. Then, she mentions that the creature Rico saw the previous night was nothing more than a piece of meat she was going to have for dinner, but which she decided to place in the anti-curse box as an experiment. The meat briefly came back to life, only to die again within a few hours. Seizing the opportunity, Ozan mocks Rico, comparing her to that very piece of meat and questioning how long she will be able to survive in the abyss before meeting her ultimate end. This enrages Reg. However, she easily takes him down, utilizing her superhuman strength to render him unconscious with a single blow. When Reg regains consciousness, he finds himself surrounded by a group of delvers known as the Subterranean Bandits, who stop the fight after being alerted by Marolk. Ozan, showing no remorse, admits that everything was a test to measure Rico and Reg's determination and survival capabilities. She concludes that although Reg possesses great resilience, in their current state, they would not be able to survive the abyss's depths without proper training. Then, Ozan reveals that she had lied about another important detail. The tomb in which she found Liza's belongings was not actually occupied. In a brief flashback, we are shown that Ozan was Liza's mentor, training her from when she was a simple red whistle until she became a black rank explorer. After recalling those moments, Ozan decides to subject Rico and Reg to a final challenge, to survive on their own in the camp's outskirts for the next 10 days. Before letting them go, she warns Reg to only use the incinerator as a last resort, as it renders him unconscious for 2 hours every single time he uses it. After Ozan withdraws, Rico and Reg are left alone in the camp's outskirts. They soon encounter some aquatic creatures, reminding them of the urgent need to find water to survive. After some time, they manage to establish a camp and spend the next 5 days hunting a creature similar to a hippopotamus. After 10 days, they complete their survival training and return to the Delvers' camp. That night, they share a dinner with Ozan, who explains to them that time flows differently within the abyss. Although 10 years have passed on the surface since Liza descended, for her, only a few years might have elapsed. Then, Ozan warns them not to spend too much time in the 5th layer and mentions another white whistle named Bondrewd, whom they absolutely must avoid. Before saying goodbye, Ozan hands Rico a relic, a pickaxe that once belonged to Liza, and advises her to use it sparingly so as not to break it. Later, Marolk and the Subterranean Bandits bid farewell to the children. As she watches their departure, Ozan recalls the promise she made to Liza to help Rico find her when the time was right. Finally, Rico and Reg bid farewell to the camp and head towards the 3rd layer of the abyss, famously known as the Great Fault. They soon discover that the 3rd layer is a place filled with strange things everywhere, but it also features numerous interconnected caverns that allow them to avoid flying predators. As they descend through one of the caverns, they come across a ship which excites Rico, who decides to search for possible relics inside it. However, she soon realizes that this is the nest of one of those flying predators, and facing the danger, Reg uses the incinerator to kill it. Reg's powerful shot attracted the attention of a scarlet maw that lunged at them, but both managed to escape in time before Reg passes out. Riko, with no other option, drags her companion while they try to find something to eat. Shortly after, she is drawn in by a sweet aroma. What she didn't know was that the scent was guiding her directly into a trap, and she is swallowed by a creature known as an amakagame, an enormous living stomach. Worried about being digested, she begins to force her way through the creature's interior, and finally she manages to get out. Immediately, both of them are surrounded by some rodents that attack them due to the lingering scent of the amakagami. However, Riko manages to escape that situation and finds herself in a cavern with a steep incline. The slope is so pronounced that she begins to suffer the strain of ascending, but hearing the rodents approaching, she decides to push forward despite the pain. Upon reaching the top, Reg awakens, but he's not alone as the Scarlet Maw reappears. Reg uses Liza's pickaxe to damage the creature, causing an explosion in its side, which ultimately saves them. After this, they set up a camp and managed to see the fourth layer, known as the Giant's Chalice. Then, they traveled there and found it incredibly humid, composed of gigantic discs filled with warm water. While walking through the fourth layer, they reached an area dense with fog. Rek notices something behind them, and when the fog clears, both are scared to see an extremely dangerous creature. Recognizing the monster, Riko tells Rek they must run immediately, as it is a Tamagotchi, an animal with spines so sharp they can penetrate steel, and they are also saturated with a deadly poison. The boys try to flee, but the Tamagotchi easily predicts their path. With few options, Reggie tries to block the spines using a relic, but these easily pierce her while the creature rapidly approaches Riko. At that moment, she suggests using her mother's horn, but before they can react, one of the spines perforates her hand, injecting the lethal poison. Without another choice, Rek decides to escape with Riko to a higher place, but remembers what Osen mentioned about the fourth layer. If someone ascends a few meters, their body starts bleeding everywhere. Still, they decide to go up, and soon Riko begins to bleed alarmingly, leaving Rek completely traumatized by the scene. In the midst of his agony, delirious from pain, Riko tells Rek he needs to amputate his arm to stop the spread of the poison. Rek starts cutting, but halfway through the procedure, Rek stops breathing. Rek falls into panic, convinced he has lost her, but at that moment, a mysterious rabbit-like creature appears and orders him to calm down and guides him to perform CPR. After stabilizing Riko, Reg takes her to the rabbit's hideout, which introduces itself as Nanachi. After being saved, Nanachi explains that the Abyss Curse does not affect that place. Nanachi starts healing Riko's left hand, and reveals she has been observing them since they arrived at the fourth layer. While talking, Reg hears a noise in another room, and Nanachi tells him it's just her roommate called Miti. Reg, intrigued, asks what kind of creature it is, and Nanachi explains that Miti is also a hollow, someone who has lost their human form after suffering stress from ascending from the sixth layer. Nanachi details that those trying to ascend from such depth usually die immediately or lose all their humanity, transforming into beings like Miti. However, Nanachi mentions she is an exception to that rule. Then, she gives Reg a list of ingredients needed to treat Riko's wound and some food for dinner. While Nanachi cares for Riko, she shows particular interest in the white whistle she carries. When Reg returns with the items, Nanachi places water mushrooms on Riko's arm to drain the accumulated liquid and prevent decay. Then, she sends Rek to clean Riko's clothes by the river outside the hideout. While Rek walks towards the river, passing between flowers, she has a vision of Lisa's empty grave and a blue gemstone she doesn't recognize but seems familiar. Her thoughts are interrupted when Nanachi calls her back to the cave. Later, when Riko is alone, Miti approaches slowly and starts climbing onto her, trying to make contact. Rek returns to the hideout and observes Miti approaching Riko, putting him on alert. However, Nanachi assures him he doesn't need to worry, as Miti is harmless. After an unpleasant dinner, Nanachi uses a relic called Fog Cloth, a fine cloth that precisely shows the Abyss Curse. Nanachi explains that the curse affects everyone at once and infuses all living creatures with a kind of energy. As you move away from the vertical axis of the abyss, the curse weakens, which is why their hideout is so safe. She also mentions that creatures like the Tamagotchi can predict others' actions because they can see the force field, and clarifies that she can see it too, because she became a hollow. To help Reg understand how to perceive this energy, Nanachi gives him a brief training session. While practicing, they hear a black whistle being attacked by a sphere drill. Following Nanachi's instructions through an earpiece, Reg uses his incinerator to scare off the beast, then asks the black whistle to inform Jiro that both he and Riko are safe and plan to continue their journey. On returning, Rek thanks Nanachi for her help, but notices she seems more serious than usual. After witnessing the power of the incinerator, Nanachi asks for a favor. Rek, without hesitation, says he will do anything for her, to which Nanachi responds that she wants him to kill Midi. Right then, Rek faints from using the incinerator, so Nanachi brings her back to the hideout. On the way, she remembers her past and the reason she's lived in the 4th layer for so long. Soon we see a human version of Nanachi in what seem to be the slums of a foreign country. Suddenly, children start coming out curious about what's happening following her. She discovers that the cause of all the commotion is a white whistle named Bon Rudd. He invites the older children to face the abyss and accompany him on his next journey. As expected, Nanachi, being one of the orphans, decides to join the group. During the descent to the 5th layer, Nanachi and Midi meet for the first time and get along well immediately. Soon we discover that Midi dreams of becoming a white whistle someday. Upon reaching Idefront, the base of Bondu, a voice over the intercom warns them that if they ascend more than 10 meters in that place, they will suffer severe injuries. Then the children are taken to the room where they will live, and we see that Bondroit calls them one by one until only Midi and Nanachi remain. One night, Bondroit enters the room and asks Midi to accompany him. Worried, Nanachi listens to the white whistle talking to one of his men about experiments clearly violating human rights. Anxious, Nanachi decides to look for Midi and finally finds her inside a large tube. Suddenly, Bondroid appears behind Nanachi and informs her that now it's her turn to be placed in another container alongside Midi. He explains that both are in elevators designed to descend to the 6th layer, the perfect place to study human reactions to the curse of that depth, which can cause death or complete loss of humanity. As expected, the girls enter a state of shock upon understanding what awaits them and are forced to embark on a terrible journey. When they reach the next layer, both are very scared. Nanachi tries to cheer up Midi, telling her everything will be okay and that she will resist the curse for her. It is then when Midi asks her to let her go if she reaches the point of losing her humanity. After some time, both regain consciousness and begin to ascend, and soon Nanachi takes her current form, while Midi starts bleeding intensely and screams in pain, reaching the point of begging to be killed. Nanachi is very scared and can only desperately watch as her best friend turns into a formless creature. Back in the 5th layer, Von Drood observes the result of the experiment with satisfaction. The procedure transferred all the curse to one of the two. As a result, Midi was cursed and lost her humanity. In the present, Nanachi tells this story to Rek, who now understands why she asked him to kill Midi. Nanachi explains that due to Bondrout's experiments, Midi has become immortal and cannot die, no matter what they try. Despite all her efforts to free her, nothing has worked, and Nanachi feels guilty for not ending her friend's suffering. After hearing the story, Reg agrees to help her. Sometime later, Nanachi prepares a small, comfortable place for Midi, and after bidding her farewell with tears in her eyes, Reg uses his incinerator to completely disintegrate Midi and finally release her from her agony. Nanachi, overwhelmed by sadness, cries for her friend. The next day, Riko regains consciousness and after cooking them a meal, tells them that while she was unconscious, she had a terrifying nightmare, but felt comforted by sensing someone else's presence, realizing it was Midi. Then, Riko and Rek spend some time together in a hot spring. Later, Nanachi painfully removes the water mushrooms from her left hand. Before leaving, Riko asks Nanachi to join their search for Lisa, and Nanachi accepts, as she has nothing else to do in that place. Before leaving the hideout, they stock up on provisions and send a balloon hoping it will reach the surface. Eventually, that balloon is found by Nathi Shigi in the external world. Meanwhile, in Idefront, Bondrout observes the data he has collected and realizes that Nanachi has accomplished the impossible, freeing Midi from her immortality. This leads him to conclude that the little rabbit will soon return to his base again. Upon reaching the 5th level, the boys entered the Garden of Resistance Flowers, where they encountered one of Bonruit's Hands of Shadow. Who are these hands? I'll explain later. Rek decided to talk to her, as she seemed to have valuable information. This clone returned the immortal scythe she had lost before and told us shocking news. While descending into the abyss, this area was declared a prohibited zone. The reason for this prohibition were the Kwangatari, lethal insects that camouflage among the resistance flowers and attack other creatures by implanting larvae in their bodies. Rek noticed numerous corpses in the area, while the hand took care of incinerating the remains. After this, the group reached the bottom of the 5th layer. 3,000 years ago, this place housed the ruins of a sanctuary. But over time, Bondru transformed the area into an advanced exploration base used for spiritual preparation before descending to the 6th level. Additionally, in this place, sacrifice rituals were performed, which were necessary to obtain the vital glowstone, used to create the white whistles. To descend to the 6th level of the Abyss, it is necessary to use the Absolute Limit Altar. However, this altar can only be activated by a white whistle. At first glance, it would seem that Rico has everything he needs to descend, as he possesses the white whistle that belonged to Lisa. But here's the problem. The altar only responds to the original owner of the white whistle. Even Bonruit cannot activate the altar for them. Moreover, a white whistle is created from a person who has given their life to make it. When they reached Idofront, the group met Pruska, Bonruit's adopted daughter. At first, it seemed that Pruska had a hostile attitude towards them, but having the same age, she quickly grew fond of the group. Then they met Bonruit and his Hands of Umbra. To their surprise, Bonruit was very friendly to them, even offering to let them stay in his base for the night, as they did not have a white whistle to descend further. That night, Nanachi woke up and had a conversation with Bonruit. He told her how much he valued her and offered to let her stay in his base, promising to show her many things. Nanachi accepted with a condition that Bonruit not harm Rico or Rek. Meanwhile, Rico woke up and realized that neither Rek nor Nanachi were nearby. She tried to find them, but all the doors were closed, except for a staircase leading to the upper level. The problem is that, on the 5th level, ascending causes a severe mental alteration and sensory collapse. Trying to climb the stairs, Rico suffered several injuries and even broke a tooth before falling and fainting. Luckily, Pruska appeared to help her. Here, Pruska revealed her greatest secret. She had a pet named Manja who possessed a special ability. Her sensory organs were different from a human's, so the Abyss Curse did not affect her. Pruska explained to Rico that if she smelled Manja and memorized her scent, she could follow her and thus avoid the effects of the 5th level, allowing her to ascend without suffering damage. Bonruit revealed to Nanachi that Reg is a very valuable object. Then he ordered his hands to capture him for investigation. These immobilized his body and, using a powerful artifact, cut off one of his arms. This artifact is extremely powerful, capable of destroying everything in its path with a light beam. Bonruit's plan was to cut off the other limb and then analyze his internal organs. Fortunately, Nanachi and Pruska arrived in time to save him. Pruska helped Rico and Rek escape using a kind of boat, and before letting them go, apologized to them. She promised to talk to her father about what she had done. However, Bonruit did not stay still and chased them. The boys decided to face him once and for all. For this, they attracted Bonruit and a group of his hands to a nest of 7-tailed scorpions. These scorpions attacked immediately, using their venomous tails to quickly eliminate the clones, as their stings can destroy flesh and bone instantly. However, Bonruit survived thanks to his prognosis, a skill that allowed him to predict danger and escape in time. Nanachi began to suspect that Bonruit had done something with his eyes, as he seemed capable of seeing everything she saw. Thus, Bonruit could anticipate her plans. Nevertheless, he was still impressed by her actions and, with his typical attitude, responded with admiration, saying that he was always more surprised by her. At the end of the battle, Reg caught Bonruit and brought him to the waters containing the 6th level curse. Then he lifted him quickly, causing Bonruit to lose his humanity and die. However, Pruska and one of the hands had been watching the entire battle. The hand approached Bonruit's body, took his helmet, and transformed into Bonruit. Here, the truth was revealed. Bonruit possessed a giant plant-shaped artifact called Shuakalik. This artifact allowed him to capture souls and transfer his consciousness to another body, essentially making him immortal. All this battle had been a prepared spectacle by Bonruit for his daughter. He wanted her death to awaken intense emotions in her. Through his experiments, he discovered that the Abyss Curse could be avoided if redirected towards another person. If the person receiving the curse did so voluntarily with a sincere desire to protect someone else, the original bearer would be free from the curse's effects. For this reason, Bonruit took children to the 5th level and made sure they loved him before converting them into cartridges, using their bodies to absorb the curse instead. Bonruit did the same with Pruska. It would seem logical that all these people should have turned into white whistles, as they sacrificed themselves for Bonruit. However, the rules of the Abyss establish that a person can only receive one single white whistle. In this case, Bonruit had already received his white whistle by sacrificing his own body for himself. Upon discovering all this, the boys decided to infiltrate Idofront and destroy the artifact to remove Bonruit's immortality. To achieve this, Rico and Nanachi distracted the hands, while Rek headed to the energy source to disconnect it. Rek broke the electrical cables, successfully disabling the base, but as a consequence, he lost his memory due to overload. When Rek and Nanachi reunited with Bonruit again, Rek appeared out of his mind, full of confusing and painful memories, so he attacked him. Initially, he managed to injure him, but Bonruit unleashed all his strength and trapped him. Refusing to lose, Rek decided to destroy everything and began charging his ray. At that moment, Nanachi ran toward him and tried to make him regain his senses. Fortunately, she managed to calm him down, although Reg still caused significant destruction. After this, Reg confessed to Nanachi that he felt as if there were several versions of himself inside him. At one point, one of them took control of his body. However, thanks to Nanachi, he was able to become himself again. In the pit where Nanachi and Midi once were, Rek encountered Bondrute again. Bondrute wanted to fight him without limitations in an unrestricted duel. Rek remembered some combat moves and started fighting with him. Nanachi gave him advice. Bondrute's cartridges were not eternal, so he only had to resist until exhausting him. During the fight, Bondrute gradually began to transform into his perfect form and at one point tried to examine Reg's body with his own hands. However, Riku appeared and shot Bondrute using Reg's amputated arm. Thanks to this, they managed to split Bondrute in two. Before dying, Bondrute told Nanachi that he deeply admired her. He assured that he was really glad they had managed to reach the 5th level and wished them success in their journey to the bottom of the abyss. After the battle, the group discovered something impactful. One of Bondrute's cartridges contained Prushka. It was revealed that in the past, Prushka suffered severe injuries during an accident. Prushka was going to be eliminated to avoid her continuing to suffer. However, Bondrute decided to take care of her and help her recover. He gave her a name, gifted her Manya, and continued taking care of her even after her most severe injuries. Thanks to this, Prushka grew up as a loving and caring girl. Although, as we know, Bondrute only raised her to become one of his cartridges. But something unexpected happened. While Bondrute was transforming her into a cartridge, Prushka never stopped thinking about Riko, with whom she had formed a strong friendship in a short time. Due to this, her vital glowstone took the shape of a heart and when rubbed, emitted a sound, being thus a signal that Prushka chose Riko as the carrier of the whistle. Thanks to this new white whistle, Riko and Nanachi could activate the Absolute Limit Altar. After this, they entered a special capsule and began their journey to the 6th level of the abyss. By the way, when Rek put on his helmet, strange symbols began to shine on it. Nanachi discovered that this was a countdown timer, indicating how many times more Rek could use his ray. But what will happen when the counter reaches 0? Perhaps we will find out soon. After crossing the Sea of Corpses, Riko's group arrived at the 6th layer, known as the City of No Return. This place is filled with ancient, mysterious ruins, and it is rumored to be a golden city. Although it sounds fascinating, before exploring it as true adventurers, the group needed to find some food. After an intense search, they found a Misusaku nest. According to Lisa's culinary critique, the newly laid eggs of this species are a delicacy, so Riko took some to taste. While selecting the freshest ones, a rain of lava accompanied by toxic gases began to fall outside, forcing them to flee quickly before the situation worsened. After finding a safe place, Riko took out the stolen eggs to cook them, deciding to boil them all. Everything went well until he started peeling the shell, and some were still moving. While Nanachi hesitated, Rek, bravely, decided to try the first one. She thought it wouldn't be too bad, but it turned out to be even worse than she imagined and continued writhing inside her mouth. With his culinary creativity, Riko decided to change his strategy and opted to coat and fry them. Although the appearance was still somewhat unpleasant, the taste was surprisingly delicious. It was so irresistible that even Nanachi lost all shame and ate them without hesitation. The taste reminded Riko of the meals at the orphanage, leading her to ask Nanachi to write an illustrated letter for their friends and send it via a balloon. However, the balloon didn't fly very far before being caught by a monster. Seeing how complicated it was to send messages there, the group decided to leave it alone and rest for a while. They didn't know that something was watching them from afar. When Nanachi woke up, she noticed that the letter they had sent had returned, but with strange characters written on it. Additionally, Riko couldn't find Prushka anywhere. Confident in her instincts and tracking skills, the group began searching for the culprit. During the search, Maine already found 2 small creatures with their anus sewn up, which was quite unsettling. Rek decided to open the seam and pulled out a strand of hair. After carefully smelling it, she realized it was Riko's hair and Nanachi's tail fur. With the intention of solving the mystery, they continued advancing until they found some strange footprints. Following the footprints, Riko and his friends arrived at an entrance resembling a corpse of some creature. The most unsettling part was that on the wall near the portal, there was a symbol identical to the mysterious letter. Determined to uncover the truth, the group approached the portal. At that moment, Nanachi noticed that the force barrier in that area had disappeared, and even the smoke from the torch used to repel beasts was being absorbed by the area. But those oddities were just the beginning of what lay behind the door. On the other side, they found a village inhabited by mutant beings. While the group was still surprised, a mutant approached them. Surprisingly, it spoke human language and introduced itself as Maji Kaja, or simply Kaja. Noticing that this individual seemed friendly and could communicate, Riko asked if he knew anything about Prushka's whereabouts. After thinking for a moment, Kaya indicated that they should follow him, as maybe that thing was in the jewelry shop. In this village, there was no abyss curse, but instead, these strange-minded mutant creatures lived there. Everything was too confusing, so the only way to advance was to gather more information from the villagers. After a doubtful walk, they finally reached the shop. Inside, a mutant was struggling and sculpting Prusia. When seeing this, Reggie tried to intervene, but Rico stopped him. He could feel that Prusia wasn't suffering. Noticing the confusion on their faces, Kaya explained that these stones must be transformed into a musical instrument to reach their maximum potential. The group found logic in the explanation and decided to leave Pruska there for now. Then Kaya led them around the village, and the Nyara Forstress, Kavra Myers, and their first stop was the market. According to what the mutant explained, in this village everything was exchanged based on its value. Each individual had a specific value, and their mutated bodies reflected this principle. Most of the inhabitants had been explorers who tried to conquer the abyss, but unable to return, they settled here. To obtain protection, they offered their own life as an offering to their ambitions. Walking through the market, Rico was fascinated by some old exploration objects. Among them, she discovered a page from Lisa's letter. However, the shop owner immediately snatched it, as it was a valuable object. Rico asked Kaya to negotiate on her behalf, offering her own objects in exchange. However, the value Kaya proposed as a trade was Rico's own body. Despite being a child, her value was extremely high, and even Kaya seemed tempted to make a deal for her, but Rico refused without hesitation. She still had to conquer the abyss and wasn't going to trade her body like that. Luckily, the village rules stated that no one could steal or take another's value without paying a high price. Right after, the group witnessed someone breaking this rule. A villager captured Menya and severely injured her. It seemed that poor Rico's pet was on the brink of death, but Nanachi managed to save her, putting her organs back in place. Indignant, Rico declared that Menya was invaluable. Without realizing it, this statement activated a mechanism in the village. Immediately, dark shadows appeared and captured the attacker. As punishment, they stripped him of everything he possessed. According to Kaya's explanation, those dark shadows were the village's compensation mechanism. They were calculating the value that needed to be reimbursed to Rico, using everything the attacker possessed, including his own body, until the amount was equivalent. Once the loss value was balanced, the compensation would be given to the affected person. For this reason, while Rico and her friends stayed in the village, they would be safe, as no one could pay the price of their values. Thanks to this unexpected wealth, the group could find a place to stay. Just after settling into their rooms, they could enjoy a typical village meal. Although it was delicious, Rico ended up having an urgent bathroom visit. While she struggled with her stomachache, Regina Nachi decided to go explore. As soon as they left the inn, they noticed that the villagers seemed to be heading towards a single location. Amid the crowd, they saw Kaya and asked what was happening. He explained that everyone was going to see Faputa, a creature considered the incarnation of courage. Extremely rare to see and always full of anger. After hearing this, both suspected that this creature might be related to what happened in the cave. As leaving Manya and Rico alone could be dangerous, Nanachi decided to return to protect them, while Rek went ahead to investigate. Before leaving, Nanachi asked Kaya to indicate where to find water. Although Kaya was curious to see Faputa, he preferred to help Nanachi to avoid involving Rico and losing value in the village. While Rek pushed through the crowd, he eventually found himself face-to-face with Faputa, also known as the Mutant Princess. Without warning, she launched herself at him as if they had some kind of relationship. However, in Rek's mind, there were only fragmented memories of the princess. To prevent the villagers from interfering, Faputa took Rek and left with her robotic companion. Later, she released him in a small cave. Although Rek had the feeling of knowing her, he couldn't remember anything clearly. The princess examined him closely and then affirmed with certainty that he was her friend. However, what confused Rek the most was the way she called him Rek, as if he had always carried that name, despite it being given to him by Rico. Without getting more information from Faputa, Reg decided to leave, leaving the princess behind. However, his mind remained unsettled, especially by Faputa's words. Everything that was happening only increased his curiosity about his own past. While looking for the way back, Rek was attacked by a Nautilus dragon that threw him into the void. At the last moment, Faputa's robot managed to grab him, but instead of taking him back to the princess, it returned him to the village. On the way back, the robot revealed that Faputa had created an amulet to protect Rico's group from predators in the cave. That amulet was nothing but the two creatures with their anus sewn up that they had found earlier. Also, the robot introduced himself as Gaburo, a machine whose function was to intervene, observe, interact, and gather knowledge. He explained that Rek's structure was identical to theirs, but curiously, they had no knowledge of their origin. He also mentioned that, unlike the others, Red could move freely between the different levels of the abyss. Therefore, if he really wanted to know his identity, he had to seek answers on his own. Meanwhile, after her battle with the toilet, Riko set out to find her friends. On the way, a group of suspicious mutants observed her and managed to lure her into a narrow alley, where they worked together to take away Manya. Fortunately, the same villager who had previously injured Manya appeared to save her. Not long after, the calculation entities reactivated, allowing Riko to escape safely. In gratitude and as a symbol of their new friendship, Riko called him Ma, based on his way of speaking. After the encounter, Riko and her new friend headed to a restaurant where they met a lady who understood human language. There was also Wasakian, one of the 3 sages who founded the village. At the end of their meal, Riko asked the lady to teach her some words in her language, and also asked if she knew any place where she could find her friends. With kindness, the woman pointed to a place known as the Deep Well, a mysterious location that even the villagers avoided approaching. Following the trail, Riko entered the area and found the calculation entities. Following the sound, she discovered a real person, a woman who introduced herself as Bueruko, or simply Bueko. Riko approached and asked if she knew anything about her friends. Although Bueko could sense someone's presence, she was chained and couldn't do much to help. Riko didn't hesitate to free her and brought her back to the surface. Based on the signals she had perceived earlier, Bueko led Riko and her new companion to Belav's residence, one of the 3 sages. Once there, she waited outside while Riko entered. Riko was happy to see Nanachi, but her happiness vanished instantly when she received shocking news. Nanachi had sold herself to Belav. Everything had happened when Kaya brought Nanachi to Belav. Seeing Midi being absorbed by Belav, the little beast couldn't bear it and ended up making the exchange, although this Midi wasn't the original. In the past, Bondriu and Belav had crossed paths. Belav was completely obsessed with Midi, to the point of wanting to exchange value to obtain her. However, Bondriu rejected her offer. His desire to possess Midi was so great that Belaf decided to pay a personal price to recreate her with absolute fidelity, even down to the soul. To save Nanachi, the only option was to make a value exchange. Through her eyes, Riko recognized that Belav had been the same person who helped her when she was unconscious. Moved by Nanachi's sacrifice, she asked what the price was to release her. Belav really didn't want to negotiate, but if Riko offered her body, he would accept the deal. However, that price was too high, so Riko tried to negotiate. Finally, Belav made 3 offers. 1, her eyes, 2, her legs, 3, half of her internal organs. Riko could choose any option and he would take it without objection. After thinking for a moment, Riko was about to make an unsensible decision, but Kaya stopped her just in time. Seeing that the girl was capable of selling herself, Mei and Kaya immediately took her away. Later, Riko reunited with Bueko and begged her to find a way to save Nanachi, but Bueko didn't have the power to help. In the midst of her desperation, suddenly, a spear was shot. Bueko realized that the villagers were performing an invocation ritual, so she changed course and led Riku to witness it. According to Bueko, the value within the village was stable, meaning the villagers couldn't gain more riches without a sacrifice. That's why sometimes they attracted monsters to kill them and extract their value, regardless of how dangerous it was. However, the summoned monster changed direction suddenly. Riko realized it was heading towards the market, and that route led directly to the jewelry shop where Pruchka was. Without wasting time, Riko ran as fast as she could to get there before a disaster occurred. When she arrived, the jeweler returned Pruchka, now converted into a white whistle, and advised her to leave immediately. As soon as Riko left, the jeweler used his ability to transform into a giant and confront the monster. However, despite his efforts, he was defeated and devoured, becoming a mere snack for the beast. The creature continued its path towards the market, but this time it was stopped by Yoroimo, one of the 3 sages with a huge body. However, the conditions of the space were not favorable to him, and his movements were limited, putting him at a disadvantage. In the chaos, Riko reconnected with the restaurant owner. She organized a group of villagers to protect the market and attack the beast. But if even a giant sage had difficulties, what could ordinary villagers do against the creature? Observing the battle, Riko devised a plan to defeat it. She asked everyone to return to the market and prepare for the fight. As part of her strategy, she cut a strand of her hair and used it to increase Kaya's value, giving her an advantage in the battle. When the monster reached the market, Riko pushed Kaya to run and attract the monster. She led him through an intense pursuit. When they reached a foggy mirror, the monster became confused. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the villagers initiated their attack plan. They captured and began destroying the creature's core. When it seemed that the hunt had been successful, the beast suddenly woke up and trapped several villagers, including Ma, who tried to protect Riko. At that moment, Pruchka manifested from the stone and told Riko to use it. The white whistle resonated in the air, causing a strange phenomenon that saved everyone instantly. The figure that appeared was Reg in her white battle form. Following the whistle's order, she launched herself into the attack to eliminate the creature. However, as she approached, she realized that only an empty shell remained. Just then, Wasukian appeared and explained the true nature of the beast. Seeing that the sage seemed to know many things, Riko took the opportunity to ask how she could free Nanachi. After reflecting, Wasukian responded that the only way for Balaf to accept a trade would be to offer him a part of Faputa's body. Back at the inn, Reg listened to the whole story and without hesitation offered to resolve the problem with Faputa. As soon as he left the village, he encountered the mutant princess. Reg explained the entire situation from start to finish, and she agreed to help him, but with a condition: he had to help her fulfill her wish. However, Rek no longer remembered her, so she asked her to remind him exactly what she wanted. If it was within her capabilities, she would do everything possible to help her. Upon hearing this, Faputa tore off a part and gave it to Rek as part of the deal. Meanwhile, Bueko began recounting her own story and the origin of the village. Long ago, Bueko was an orphan girl, abandoned and taken in by a sick man who raised and abused her. In one of his sea expeditions, this man and his crew found a destroyed ship. All the sailors on board had been brutally murdered, except for an elderly survivor who managed to survive. This elder spoke about a magical compass pointing towards the Golden City at the deepest level of the abyss. Due to the unbearable cruelty of the man who raised her, Bueko fled with the compass. After undergoing rigorous training, she was finally selected as a crew member in an expedition from the kingdom destined for the Golden City in the abyss. The leader of this expedition was Wazukian, known as the Prophet. Also present were Belub, the sage, and Bueko, who served as navigator. Together, they formed the trio of sages who would guide the way to the Golden City. After many difficulties, only Bueko's ship managed to reach the abyss. During their journey through the dense jungle, the expedition was captured by a native tribe. However, they managed to be freed by exchanging the compass with the natives, who provided them with information about the Golden City in return. This city was also known as the City Without Escape and was located in the 6th level of the abyss. When the expedition was about to continue their journey, Bueko noticed that someone was following them. It was a girl named Irumiui who had been rejected by her village due to her infertility. Sympathizing with her, Bueko asked permission for the girl to accompany them, and Wasukian agreed. Despite her young age, Irumiui had some knowledge about the abyss and helped the group overcome several challenges at each level. Finally, after overcoming countless difficulties, they managed to reach the city without escape. As its name indicated, there was no way to return. Wazukian attempted to send people back through the same path they had descended, but all the test subjects suffered extreme mutations. Facing this situation, Wazukian decided there was no other option and summoned everyone to establish their own empire in that place. While exploring, they managed to befriend some intervention machines. Thanks to their help, the expedition found a source of water. Additionally, the village inhabitants began hunting monsters for meat, ensuring the community's subsistence. The relationship between Iru and Bueko grew closer, becoming inseparable. For Iru, Bueko was like a warm and protective mother, while for Bueko, Iru represented the light she had always been searching for. However, peace didn't last long. Irumiui began suffering from severe diarrhea, and her excretions contained tiny eggs. Some villagers started showing similar symptoms, and even parts of their bodies began to detach. After investigating the origin of the problem, Belab confirmed that the disease came from the water they were consuming. Wazukian understood the situation but knew there was no other alternative if they wanted to survive. Just as they hadn't yet resolved this pressing issue, a brand new threat emerged. 3 members of the hunting party, upon their return, displayed clear signs of a severe mutation. The cause seemed to be directly linked to an ancient artifact they had brought back with them. According to the intervention machine's detailed explanation, this particular artifact was widely known as the Cradle of Greed. Its primary function was to grant wishes to its chosen bearer, but it could only be safely utilized by children. If an adult were to touch it directly, they would unfortunately suffer the very same dreadful fate as the mutated hunters. Meanwhile, the devastating epidemic within the village was rapidly worsening. Witnessing Iru writhing in agonizing pain, Bueko made a truly desperate decision. She carefully placed the Cradle of Greed upon the young girl, fervently hoping it could save both herself and everyone else. And just as she hoped, it happened. The artifact fused with Iru's body, and the little girl miraculously began to recover. The painful sores she had were no longer hurting, but that was merely the very beginning of an even greater unfolding tragedy. Iru's body soon began to undergo horrifying mutations. Shortly thereafter, the young girl started giving birth repeatedly, over and over again, yet none of her offspring managed to survive for more than a single day. It was an endless, agonizing cycle of profound suffering that slowly but surely destroyed her bit by bit. Meanwhile, the relentless disease continued to spread throughout the community, and Bueko herself also became infected. It truly seemed as though the village's fate was sealed, until Wazukian miraculously saved her with a very strange, peculiar food. It was at that precise moment when Bueko finally uncovered the true, sinister nature of that enigmatic man. Throughout her recovery period, Iru continued to undergo further horrifying mutations. Regardless of their heart-wrenching, agonizing cries, their grim fate was the kitchen, where they were brutally sacrificed and then meticulously prepared as the very food that cured the villagers' terrible illness. Immediately after they were born, by the shocking truth, Hueko could only prostrate herself before Iru and desperately beg for her forgiveness. Even though she had already transformed into a grotesque, deformed, and utterly unrecognizable creature, her deep feelings for Hueko never ever changed. During one of her regular visits to Iru, Hueko made a shocking discovery. Someone had implanted yet another cradle of greed deep within her body. The one responsible for this heinous act was none other than Wazukian himself. When the long-awaited moment he had anticipated finally arrived, he commanded that Iru be taken to a towering precipice. It was then that the young girl, after enduring all her immense suffering, at last truly awakened. Iru began to capture various creatures all around her to absorb their vital nutrients and grow stronger. Within the entire group, Belav was undoubtedly the one who suffered the most profoundly. He was constantly torn between overwhelming guilt and an irresistible temptation, utterly ravaged by the internal conflict between his fading humanity and the powerful allure of the cursed soup that kept him barely alive. Unable to endure it any longer, he made the solemn decision to voluntarily offer himself as a sacrifice, hoping that Hyrule would punish him. In that very instant, a mysterious, ethereal door suddenly opened wide. Belaf stepped inside without a moment's hesitation, and his body immediately began to transform, gradually taking on the distinct form he possesses in the present day. One by one, the remaining members of the expedition followed his lead, all except for Hueko. She simply didn't believe that this was Iru's true, genuine desire, and so she made the drastic decision to hurl herself into the terrifying abyss. However, Wazukian swiftly intervened and stopped her. On his hands, there were still visible, lingering marks from having previously used the Cradle of Greed himself. Hueko pondered deeply, wondering why that man was willing to go to such extreme lengths, but before she could even receive an answer, she was brutally struck until she fell completely unconscious. When she finally awoke, she realized that Wazukian had imprisoned her in a secluded place where, he claimed, she and Iru could somehow reconnect with each other. During her period of confinement, Hueko came to know Iru's cursed, unfortunate children. Deeply moved by their profound suffering, she showered them with all her love and gave each one a unique name, desperately trying to fill the immense emotional void they had endured. However, Iru still had yet another child, Faputa, the princess born from the accumulated hatred of both her mother and her siblings. Her sole, unwavering purpose was to liberate her suffering mother and utterly eradicate all the despicable beings who had condemned her to such a terrible fate. Returning to the present moment, Reg made his way back to the village, carrying with him a severed part of Faputa's body. His clear intention was to use that very part of her to exchange it for Nanachi. However, Hueko quickly intervened and stopped him, explaining that if Belav were to see that specific piece of Hueko inquired how Reg had already precarious situation could potentially become even herself had willingly given it to him, with the sole, explicit condition that he fulfill his sacred promise, to assist her in entering the village by utilizing his powerful incinerator cannon. At that very moment, Wazukian suddenly appeared on the scene, and upon seeing Reg, he immediately recognized him as the long-prophesied promised knight. Only a bond as profoundly deep and powerful as true love would compel the princess to sacrifice a part of herself in such an extraordinary manner. He also keenly noticed Hueko's presence and instantly understood that the village's hidden, secret history had finally been revealed. Then he directly asked Riko if she harbored any hatred towards him for all the terrible things that had transpired. Riko, although she didn't possess a clear definitive judgment about the enigmatic sage, instinctively felt that Wazukian was someone truly willing to sacrifice absolutely everything to fulfill his deepest desire, to embark once more on a grand expedition. In fact, Wazukian was indeed considering the possibility of utilizing Riko to help everyone make their escape from the village, but he didn't force her into anything, instead allowing her to decide completely for herself. Just at that precise moment, Yoroimo violently burst onto the scene, causing a sudden commotion. Realizing the immediate danger, Wazukian swiftly grabbed Hueko and vanished without a trace. Hueko, observing Yoroimo with much closer attention, was utterly surprised to notice that its form eerily resembled the wicked, perverse man who had raised her. Wazukian then explained that Iru herself had actually created it, based on the distinct signals transmitted from Hueko's own memories. Yoroimo possessed the unique ability to create sticky, black, viscous masses which it used to effectively block all possible exits, with the clear objective of obtaining Faputa's body part. Reg desperately attempted to escape, but they ultimately managed to snatch away the precious, valuable merchandise from him. Faced with this dire crisis, Reg had no other viable option but to unleash his powerful incinerator cannon. His devastating attack successfully defeated Yoroimo, but simultaneously, it also destroyed a significant portion of the village. Belav keenly sensed the utter chaos that was violently erupting outside. Perfect opportunity he awaited this particular day for a very long time, the day when he could finally settle his profound vengeance. Therefore, before everything truly began, he transferred all his precious memories to Nanachi and then set her free, along with Midi. However, upon crossing the sacred boundaries of the village, Midi would completely and utterly vanish. After a truly painful dilemma, with tears streaming down her face, Nanachi made the heartbreaking decision to allow Midi to finally rest in peace once more. The small beloved rabbit had to bid farewell to her most precious treasure yet again. Other beings who resided within Belev's dwelling also gathered to bid their final farewells to Midi, presenting her with one last heartfelt gift before she slowly faded away. Back in the village, Faputa was utterly unleashed, savagely tearing apart the villagers in the most brutal manner imaginable, and she was even aided by the gruesome remnants of her own siblings. Witnessing the widespread devastation, Reg, after regaining his full consciousness, resolutely decided to intervene and put a stop to her rampage. As they fiercely battled, long-forgotten memories began to flood and invade his mind. Reg had appeared at the precise moment when Faputa was at her most vulnerable, dispelling her profound loneliness and offering her an object as a cherished symbol of their friendship. However, now they found themselves on opposing sides, locked in a fierce, no-holds-barred battle. Seeing that the dire situation was clearly tilting in Faputa's favor, Reg urgently asked Riko to use the White Whistle to activate his powerful White Combat mode, which then allowed him to effectively equalize the intense confrontation against the princess. It was at that very moment when Faputa revealed a truly shocking, astonishing fact. She herself had actually asked Gaburo to take Purchka to be sculpted, and now, with a cruel twist of irony, they were using that very power directly against her. As the fierce, relentless battle continued, a scorching, blistering heat suddenly began to rain down upon the village, bringing with it a torrent of vivid memories. Reg vividly recalled the time when he and Faputa had shared a much deeper, more profound bond. Back then, she had carefully explained to him the true meaning of the ancient words carved into the village's entrance. It was called Haku, a term which signifies something utterly invaluable and precious. Faputa had lovingly bestowed that very special title upon both her mother and Gaburo. Just as a child cannot return to its mother's womb, she too was unable to enter the village herself. Therefore, she desperately needed Reggie's crucial assistance to make her deepest, most fervent desire a reality. However, back in those days, Reg was on the verge of departing on his own quest in search of his very own Haku, and so he solemnly promised her that upon his eventual return, he would indeed help her. During his prolonged absence, Faputa endured a profound, aching loneliness, and she cried countless, endless times for him. Now, in the present moment, tears once again began to well up, but this time they were not Faputa's, but rather Reggie's. He desperately pleaded with her to stop, to cease destroying herself with her overwhelming hatred. Faputa, deeply moved by his heartfelt words, felt for a fleeting instant their old familiar warmth. However, the consuming hatred that utterly devoured her was simply far too powerful. In the end, her insatiable thirst for vengeance completely clouded her judgment, and with one final devastating blow, she struck Reg down. After that brutal encounter, Faputa then carried Reg back with her. The princess furiously turned to Riko and angrily demanded to know what kind of dark sorcery she had performed on her friend to leave him in such a terrible state. Immediately thereafter, she lunged forward to attack, fully intending to finish Riko off, but at the very last moment, Gaburo swiftly intervened and stopped her. The precise reason why the old robot intervened was abundantly clear. If Faputa were to harm Riko, she herself would inevitably lose her Haku, that which she held as utterly invaluable. After uttering these profound words, Gaburo collapsed to the ground, his strength completely depleted and weakened. Witnessing yet another beloved being collapse caused Faputa's despair to reach its absolute peak. Driven mad with uncontrollable rage, she decided to utterly destroy everything in a single act of total annihilation. With her sharp claws poised and ready, she prepared to attack once more, but before she could even do anything, she was suddenly attacked by surprise. The ones who had wounded her were none other than Nanachi and Belav. As she drew closer to him, Faputa distinctly sensed the intense, unmistakable scent of her mother emanating strongly from Belav. This could only possibly mean one horrifying thing. He had consumed a very large quantity of her mother. Therefore, he would undoubtedly become her very next highest priority target. However, instead of offering any resistance whatsoever, Belav simply allowed himself to be torn apart by Faputa. He didn't fight back at all, for he had one final precious gift for the princess, the cherished memories of Iru, her beloved mother. After so many agonizing years tormented by overwhelming guilt, Belav finally found a profound sense of peace in death. Smiling gently, he expressed to Faputa his immense joy at having had the opportunity to meet her, and he earnestly asked her that from that moment forward, she herself should decide her own inherent worth and truly enjoy her very own unique adventure. Taking full advantage of Faputa being completely consumed by her overwhelming emotions, Nanachi urgently ordered everyone to evacuate Riko and swiftly get her away from the village immediately, not only because the villagers would utterly vanish upon coming into contact with the outside world, but also because Wazukian had been patiently waiting for this precise moment. The current situation was absolutely perfect for him to execute his ultimate definitive plan, to exploit the cradle of greed residing deep within the princess. Nanachi shrewdly deduced that if Riko were to tragically die, Reg would undoubtedly fall into a profound, overwhelming sadness. In that specific case, Faputa, sensing Reg's deep, agonizing pain, might very well come to share half of her own heart with Riko. At that precise moment, Wazukian would then seize the opportune chance to steal Riko's wish, exactly as he had cunningly done with Iru in the distant past. Upon fully comprehending this dire situation, Nanachi resolutely decided to do absolutely everything within her power to prevent Wazukian from successfully executing his nefarious plan. For that very reason, he decided to cling tightly to her as a living shield, and prepare himself to make a swift escape, very next target the already perilous situation were to become even more dangerous. Would remain safely protected. At the precise moment when Faputa was still completely consumed by her intense emotions, an entirely unexpected danger suddenly emerged. Through the enormous, gaping hole in the village wall, savage, monstrous creatures violently burst into the area, eagerly ravenous to feast upon the helpless villagers. Curious and enraged that her vengeance was being stolen from her, Faputa furiously launched herself into battle against the invading creatures. However, she was utterly alone and completely exhausted. Despite fighting with every ounce of her remaining strength, she couldn't possibly stand against them for very long. Eventually, her battered body was left entirely at the mercy of the ravenous monsters, and a profound emotional torment began to tear her entirely. Slowly but surely, agonizing scene, the villagers felt a deep, overwhelming sense of compassion for her plight. They knew that if she didn't retreat very soon, her fate would become increasingly tragic and dire. Just at that precise moment, the gruesome remnants of her fallen siblings rushed to her aid. However, before they could even begin to protect her, they were brutally crushed and utterly annihilated by a gigantic, serpentine dragon. Just as the monstrous beast was about to finish Faputa off, Gaburo, utilizing the very last vestiges of his remaining strength, bravely stepped in to save her. Despite knowing full well that this selfless act would undoubtedly cost him his own life, he didn't hesitate to sacrifice himself, for he wished to do the very last thing he possibly could to protect that which he considered his Haku. In the distant past, it had been Faputa herself who had originally found and then rescued him. Now, he was bravely returning that very favor with his final, dying breath. Gaburo and Faputa had shared a life filled with immense joy and happiness together. He had helped her to escape from her profound loneliness. He taught her how to read and write, and he was the one who ultimately gave her her very own name, which means the Immortal Princess. For his part, Gaburo's name signified the Queen's steadfast guardian. However, after being violently thrown by the venomous breath of the gigantic serpentine dragon, Faputa plummeted into a state of utter, complete despair. Her body was entirely shattered, all her beloved ones had tragically perished, and her immortality was nothing more than a cruel curse that condemned her to endless, eternal suffering. Unexpectedly, the villagers suddenly saw in her their very last, desperate hope. Those who still remained within the village began to generously share their own bodies and their inherent value with her, thereby allowing her to absorb their very essence in order to fully recover. After assimilating all that mutated raw energy, Faputa resurfaced stronger and more powerful than she had ever been before. With a mighty, thunderous roar, she summoned Yoroimo and unleashed a fierce, devastating counterattack against the ravenous hordes of hungry monsters. Seizing this opportune moment, the remaining villagers swiftly escorted Riko and her group safely out of the village. During their perilous escape, they unexpectedly encountered Wazukian, but Hueko was notably not with him. Wazukian then directly asked Riko if she regretted having come all the way to that place. Without a moment's hesitation, she firmly replied that no, absolutely not. She did not regret it at all. She was truly happy to have come, to have made many new friends, and to have lived through an absolutely unforgettable experience. Satisfied with her heartfelt response, Wazukian then shared with them the profound secret to successfully conquering the abyss. It wasn't something grand or utterly unattainable, but rather a powerful combination of three essential elements. First, the accumulated knowledge gained from surviving within the abyss. Second, the boundless curiosity and pure innocence of truly enjoying every single step of the journey. Third, the unbreakable bond with those who guide and accompany the brave explorers. Riko and her group were on the verge of completing that very process. They only lacked one crucial key piece, Faputa. Therefore, Wazukian earnestly asked them to take good care of her and wished them immense success in the ultimate realization of their dreams. In the end, the wise sage, who had been utterly consumed and possessed by his own overwhelming ambitions, echoing roar slowly faded away, leaving villagers profound desires as a clear, unmistakable signal of summons. In response, those who still remained bravely rose up to fight alongside her in the climactic final battle. Before their departure, the kind tavern owner handed Riko a very important letter from Lisa, which she had managed to obtain in exchange for a specific part of Faputa's body. With absolutely everything now ready, the entire team then set off towards where Faputa was located. Meanwhile, at another distinct point within the village, Hueko managed to escape from Wazukian, painstakingly dragging herself with immense effort, attempting to reach the outside. However, she unfortunately took the wrong path and began to ascend, which inevitably led her to be severely affected by the abyss's terrible curse. With every single step she took, vivid visions of her past began to appear before her very eyes. Her former expedition companions, Iru, the children she had recently come to know, all of them watched her with an expression of unwavering determination and profound hope, but her body simply couldn't endure it any longer. The horrifying transformation caused by the curse progressed to the point of leaving her completely incapacitated and utterly unable to move forward. If it hadn't been for a brave villager who selflessly risked his own life to save her, Hueko would have fallen forever into that dreadful place. That particular villager, just like all the others, began to slowly fade away, but his valiant effort was certainly not in vain, as Nanachi continued what Hueko herself had bravely attempted to achieve. Hueko was successfully rescued and along with the remaining villagers made her way towards where Faputa was located. Just as the princess was meticulously preparing herself for the climactic final battle, Reg suddenly appeared to bravely assist her. Riko then activated Aprushka, which allowed Reg to enter his powerful white combat mode. However, the intense transformation proved to be far too much for her body, and she ultimately fainted from the sheer exertion. After having maximized all of his formidable capabilities to their absolute limit, Reg was fully ready to confront the terrifying serpentine dragons. He successfully managed to lure them far away from the village and, in one final, desperate effort, he utterly destroyed the bridge, causing the monstrous beasts to plummet into the deep abyss below. Meanwhile, Faputa finally reached Riko and the remaining villagers. Trusting in Kaya and Ma, she entrusted them with the crucial task of safely taking Riko and her entire group out of the village. The villagers who still remained then resolutely decided to offer their own bodies for Faputa to absorb, a selfless act. Thanks to this newly acquired power, she finally succeeded in liberating her beloved mother. With her greatest, most profound desire now fulfilled, Faputa was left utterly and completely exhausted. As she began to fall into the terrifying abyss, she didn't even possess the strength to resist, simply accepting her inevitable fate. However, at the very last, critical moment, Reg managed to reach her and bravely saved her. The village continued to crumble and collapse at an alarming speed. Time was rapidly running out, and to make matters even worse, Kaya's legs were severely damaged, leaving him completely unable to move. It truly seemed as though absolutely everything was lost, until Kaya utilized his unique ability to transfer his consciousness into Faputa, and then he controlled her body to open a clear escape path for everyone. In the midst of this dire crisis, Riko generously gave Ma her beloved teddy bear, which made her immensely, incredibly happy. But when Riko later awoke, Ma had completely vanished, leaving behind only the teddy bear as a poignant, cherished memento of their friendship. When everything had finally concluded, Hueko was at last able to meet Iru's very last daughter. With great difficulty, she painfully dragged herself towards Faputa and with immense effort managed to utter a few heartfelt words. Thanks to her unique ability to read thoughts, Faputa fully understood what Hueko desperately wanted to convey to her. Even though Iru had willingly given her all of her memories, the memories specifically concerning Hueko were the only ones she steadfastly refused to share, for they were the most precious, invaluable treasures she had ever kept hidden deep within her heart. Fortunately, before her final departure, Hueko was able to reconnect with Iru through the very eyes of her daughter, the precious child she had always wished to have. After the solemn funerals for all the fallen had been conducted, Faputa then realized with a heavy heart that she was now utterly and completely alone. Seeing her profound sadness, Reg kindly invited her to join his team. At first, Faputa appeared arrogant and quite reluctant, especially since Reg didn't even remember who she truly was. But, faced with his genuine sincerity and heartfelt warmth, her hardened heart was deeply moved. Although she tried her best to feign complete indifference, deep down, she ultimately accepted the invitation. Thus, Riko's team now had a brand new member. Even though many daunting challenges still lay ahead, their incredible journey would undoubtedly continue. There's still no confirmed date for a next season, but I truly hope it arrives very soon. Thank you so very much for choosing my channel to watch these comprehensive summaries. I'll be seeing you all in the very next video.